Chapter II of Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 10. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 10, by John Hay and John George Nicolay. The Albemarle. The successive captures and recaptures of the town of Plymouth in North Carolina were episodes of the war so unimportant that they would scarcely claim a place in history were it not for the memorable naval fights in the spring of 1864, in which the Confederate ironclad Albemarle gained great distinction, and the splendid heroism of a young sailor, by which, in the autumn of the same year, she was destroyed. This famous vessel was slowly and painfully constructed far inland in a cornfield on the banks of the Roanoke River, about 30 miles below Weldon. The same officer who had changed the Merrimac into the ironclad Virginia used the experience acquired in that service in the building of the Albemarle. Nearly everything requisite in shipbuilding was lacking, but in spite of all difficulties, the vessel was built at last and slid from the bluff into the river without springing a leak. She measured 152 feet in length, 45 in width, and with her armor on, drew 8 feet. In general construction she resembled all the other Confederate ironclads. Her casement or shield was 60 feet long, sloping to the deck at an angle of 45 degrees, plated with 2 courses of 2-inch iron, rolled at the Tredegar works. She was armed with 2 rifled Brooke guns, mounted on pivot carriages, so disposed that each gun commanded 3 portholes. Her beak was of oak, plated with 2-inch iron. She was a year under construction. Rumors of her progress occasionally transpired, and the brave and vigilant commander, C.W. Flusser, to whom her first sortie was to be mortal, warned the department in the summer of 1863 that a formidable craft was in preparation in the river. It would have required no considerable expedition to destroy her in the yard, but General Grant's attention was at that time fully occupied with other matters. She was not completed until April, 1864, and her first service under her captain, J.W. Cooke, was to assist General Hoke in an attack upon the town of Plymouth, which was held by a small Union force under General H.W. Wessels. Hoke's division marched down and surrounded the place, his 2 flanks resting on the river above and below the town. It was the task of the Albemarle to clear away the navy from the river front. The attack began on the 18th of April and lasted all day, with no advantage to the Confederates, Wessels' troops and the 2 gunboats, Miami and Southfield, under the intelligent direction of Flusser, repulsing every attempt to take the place. But on the next day the intervention of the Albemarle put a different face on the affair. She dropped down the river in front of the town by night, the fire of the fort rattling harmlessly against her shield. Flusser, warned of her coming, made ready for action, and steamed up to meet her with the Miami and the Southfield chained together. The adversaries met in the first glimmer of dawn. The ram struck the Miami a slight blow, and passing on, with one thrust of her beak tore open the side of the Southfield, which filled and sank almost immediately. The Miami opened upon the ram with her batteries, with results fatal only to her own brave commander. Flusser, who was personally firing the first shots, was struck by a fragment of a Dahlgren shell rebounding from the iron side of the ram, and instantly killed. His successor in command, seeing that if he remained he would simply be sacrificing his vessel uselessly, retired down the river to Albemarle Sound. The post of Plymouth, surrounded on every side, fell into the hands of the Confederates. The destruction of the Albemarle was thenceforward the principal object of the naval squadron in the Sound. Captain Melancton Smith, an able and experienced officer, was dispatched to the scene of action for that especial service. He rapidly made the necessary arrangements for attack. His main reliance was upon his guns and torpedoes. Ramming was to be resorted to in the discretion of commanders, though the peculiar construction of the double enders, of which his fleet consisted, rendered this a doubtful expedient. The Albemarle did not wait to be attacked, but sallied forth at midday of the 5th of May with the intention of clearing both Albemarle and Pamlico Sounds of the Union fleet, and if possible regaining control of Hatteras Inlet. She was attended by the transport Cotton Plant and the captured store ship Bombshell. Smith speedily got his vessels under way, the flagship Mattabesett leading, the Sassacus and the rest of the fleet following, 8 vessels in all, carrying 32 guns, besides 23 howitzers. Against this heavy armament the undaunted ironclad came on with her 2 guns, and so enormous is the power of invulnerability that the fight was not altogether unequal. We feel in reading the epics and sagas of the past that Achilles and Siegfried are safe no matter what the number of their adversaries, unless the exposed heel or the mark of the linden leaf is touched. Without the ironclads in Mobile Bay, all the valor of Farragut would have been of no avail against the tough sides of the Tennessee. The Cotton Plant was at once ordered back out of danger, and the Bombshell, at the first onset of the Union fleet, surrendered. But the Albemarle held her own sturdily. Her 2 pivot guns, working in safety and at leisure, seemed to quadruple themselves by dint of efficiency. The battle began at a quarter before 5 o'clock. The Albemarle fired 2 damaging shots into the Mattabesett and then tried to ram her, but the swifter ship evaded the blow and poured a broadside upon the ironclad. The Sassacus, coming up, did the same, and the other vessels in succession did what they could. Their principal danger was firing into or fouling each other. Their fire was by no means ineffective. The boats of the Albemarle were shot away, her smokestack so injured that it almost ceased to draw. Many of her plates were started and shattered, and her after gun was broken and disabled. But to the eyes of the officers in the Union fleet this concentrated fire appeared to have no more effect on the ironsides of the monster than so much thistledown. Lieutenant Commander F.A. Roe of the Sassacus, therefore, resolved to try the desperate expedient of ramming the ironclad. He drew off to a distance of some 200 yards, and putting on a full head of steam, rushed upon the Albemarle at a speed of 10 knots an hour. He struck her just abaft the casemate on the starboard side with a shock which caused every timber to groan, though nothing gave way. There was a moment of consternation on board the ram, but seeing they did not sink, the crew immediately rallied to their guns and continued the fight. The Sassacus steamed heavily, hoping to force the ram under water, and in this Roe might have met the success his bravery deserved, but for a shot from the Albemarle which passed through his boiler, and in an instant filled his vessel with scalding steam, disabling his engine and 16 men. Crippled as he was, his engine room inaccessible, the vessel filled with smoke and steam and the shrieks of scalded sailors, Roe still fought his guns with imperturbable gallantry, hurling upon the Albemarle his 100-pound shot, which rebounded in pieces on his own deck. He slowly dropped out of the fight, and a period of considerable confusion ensued as the result of two mistakes. The flag of the Albemarle being shot away, it was thought she had surrendered, and the Wyalusing erroneously reported herself as sinking. This caused a temporary cessation of the battle, which was not renewed with much energy until night closed in. The Albemarle, whose riddled smokestack refused to draw, was able, by burning the lard and bacon on board, to steam back to Plymouth. She had gained great glory throughout the Confederacy by her two battles, and Captain Cook was promoted to the command of the rebel navy on the coast of North Carolina. With a few knots more speed she could have destroyed the whole Union fleet. As it was, the capture of a fort with a brigade of prisoners, the destruction of a gunboat, and a drawn battle lasting a full afternoon with a squadron mounting 55 pieces, were no inconsiderable claims to renown. She came out of the Roanoke but once after this battle. On the 24th of May she was seen by a picket boat apparently dragging 4 torpedoes. A single shot fired at her caused her to retire up the stream. She lay at her berth by the wharf at Plymouth until the 27th of October, when her name was associated forever with one still more glorious. Of course the Navy Department could not count upon this long inaction, and so long as the Albemarle lay substantially unhurt at Plymouth, she was a source of constant anxiety to the squadron in the Sound. They had no ironclads of sufficiently light draught to cross the bar at Hatteras Inlet. Several were in course of construction, but it was not safe to wait for their completion. A party of volunteers from the Wyalusing was sent to destroy the ram with torpedoes late in May. But an untoward accident, the fouling of their line by a schooner, prevented a success which was merited by their courage and good conduct. September had come before the plan, and the men were found that were adapted to the work. The scheme was to fit out 2 small steam launches, rigged with spar torpedoes and armed with howitzers, which should try to reach the ram at night by surprise. The man was Lieutenant William B. Cushing, who had attracted the attention of his superiors by several noteworthy examples of coolness and daring. Once he had landed by night with 2 boat crews at the town of Smithville, being rowed under the very guns of Fort Caswell, walked with 3 men to General Lewis Haybart's headquarters, captured an officer of engineers, the general himself being absent in Wilmington, and had come safely away with his prisoner from a post garrisoned by 1,000 men. At another time, having volunteered to destroy the ironclad Raleigh, supposed to be lying in the Cape Fear River, he went in his cutter up the stream, eluding the sentries on either shore, landed within 7 miles of Wilmington, thoroughly reconnoitred the place, found the Raleigh a total wreck, and after 3 days of adventures, in which his luck and daring were equally amazing, he was intercepted on his return down the river in the moonlight by a whole fleet of guard boats, and his escape apparently cut off. Turning about, he found himself confronted by a schooner filled with troops. Instead of surrendering, he dashed for New Inlet, and, seconded by his crew, who always seemed when with him as insensible to danger as himself, he escaped into the breakers, where the enemy dared not follow, and safely rejoined his ship. His perfect coolness in critical emergencies was a matter of temperament rather than calculation. He prepared everything in advance with a care and judgment remarkable in one so young. But when the time of action came, the immediate peril of death was nothing more than a gentle stimulant to him. He enjoyed it as he would have frolicked. He was a handsome youth, 21 years of age, 6 feet high, with a beardless face and bright autumn hair. After conferences with Admiral Lee and Mr. Fox, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Cushing went to New York and found 2 launches at the Brooklyn Navy Yard suited to his purpose. They were 46 feet in length, 9½ feet wide, and drew about 40 inches. While they were being equipped for the work by Engineer-in-Chief W. W. Wood of the Navy, Cushing visited his mother in Fredonia, New York, and confided to her his intention, saying he needed her prayers. Returning to New York, he took his launches out and tested his torpedoes, and then started them southward by way of Chesapeake Bay. One of them on the way was attacked by guerrillas and burned. At Hampton Roads, Cushing refitted his only remaining boat, and passing through the Dismal Swamp, came to Roanoke Island. There he gave out that he was bound for Beaufort, and steamed away by night to join the fleet which was lying off the mouth of the Roanoke River, the senior officer being Commander W. H. Macomb, whose flagship was the Shamrock. Here for the first time Cushing disclosed to his officers and men the purpose of his expedition. Leaving them free to go or stay as they preferred, all wanted to go with him. Several others volunteered, among them Paymaster Francis H. Swan, whose anxiety for a fight was paid by a severe wound and 4 months in Libby prison. W. A. Howarth, Cushing's tried and trusted companion in former adventures, and 2 other master's mates, Thomas S. Gay and John Woodman, 2 engineer officers, Stever and Stotesbury, and 8 men. A cutter from the Shamrock was taken in tow with 11 men. Their duty was to board the wreck of the Southfield. If the guard, which was known to be posted there, should discover the party as they passed. A false start was made on the night of the 26th. The boat ran aground, and so much time was wasted in getting her off that the expedition was postponed for 24 hours. At midnight, in rain and storm, the devoted little party set forth. Fortune favored them at first. They passed the wreck of the Southfield without a hail, and came in view of the few lights of Plymouth. The little noise made by the low-pressure engines was muffled with tarpaulins, which also concealed every ray of light from the launch. Cushing stood near the bow, connected by lines with every part of the boat, as the brain is by nerves with every limb. He held a line by which he was to detach the torpedo from the spar which carried it, when it should have been shoved under the overhang of the ram; another by which he was to explode it after it had floated up to a point of contact; and 2 more, one attached to the wrist and one to the ankle of the engineer, by which he directed the movements of the boat. He had 2 complete plans in his mind. One was to use his own nervous phrase to take the Albemarle alive, by landing some distance below, stealing up, and dashing on her from the wharf. But just as he was sheering in close to the lower wharf, he heard a dog bark, a sentry hail, and a moment afterwards a shot was fired. Instantly dismissing his first plan, Cushing ordered the cutter to cast loose and row to capture the Southfield's picket, and then putting on all steam, he rushed for the ram, whose black bulk loomed in the darkness before him. By the light of a fire on the wharf he discovered that she was surrounded by a boom of logs, extending all around her, for the express purpose of protecting her against torpedoes. A brisk fire opened on the launch from the ship and the shore, but his keen intelligence was only sharpened by the danger, and he saw at a glance that on the course he was taking he could not get over the boom. He therefore sheered off 100 yards, and then turning came at full speed to strike the logs at right angles, hoping thus to slide over them, and getting inside the sort of pen they formed, to reach the ram. The fire had by this time become severe. Swan was wounded. Cushing's clothes were torn by 3 bullets. The sole of his shoe was carried away, but he was unhurt and very happy. Being hailed again as he dashed forward, he shouted, "Leave the ram. We are going to blow you up," a response as considerate as it proved truthful. His crew, catching the infection, also chaffed the Confederates, while Cushing, not wishing to let the enemy do all the firing, sent a charge of canister among them at short range, which he said served to moderate their zeal and disturb their aim. The launch, touched the logs and slid gently over them. The spar was lowered. Cushing, as cool in that shower of deadly missiles, and in face of a 100-pound rifle, whose muzzle he could now plainly see, as a skilled artisan at his bench, watched for the proper instant, detached the torpedo with a line held in his right hand, waited a moment for it to rise under the hull of the ram, and then pulled with the left hand, which had just been cut by a bullet. At the same instant the 100-pounder was fired. The grape shot at 10 feet range came roaring over Cushing and his crew, just missing them. But the torpedo had done its work, and a suffocating mass of water rose from the side of the Albemarle and fell upon the launch, half filling it and drenching the crew. Cushing, who thought his boat had been pierced by the shot from the ram, saw there was no hope of saving her. Being summoned to surrender, he refused, and ordered his crew to save themselves. He threw off his sword, revolver, coat, and shoes, and jumped into the water. The Albemarle's commander did not at first realize what had happened. He heard a dull report as of an unshotted gun. A fragment of wood fell at his feet. He sent a carpenter to examine the hull, who reported a hole big enough to drive a wagon in. The Albemarle was resting in the mud. She had sunk so little her own officers did not perceive it, and the victors were unconscious of their success. The men in the launch were captured, all but 3, who had followed Cushing in his desperate leap into the icy river. 2 of these were drowned. The third got ashore and was saved. Perhaps no event of his life gave such proof of Cushing's extraordinary nerve and endurance as his escape. He swam out in the darkness, knowing there was no shelter for him but the fleet 12 miles away. He evaded the rebel boats, which were rowing about the river, until he was well out of sight. Nearing the shore, he found Woodman drowning, and kept him up 10 minutes with his own fast failing strength, but could not bring him to land. Cushing at last managed to reach the muddy shore, and fell half in and half out of the water. There he lay until daybreak, unable to move. When the dawn came, he found himself lying on the edge of a swamp, in full view of a sentry not 40 steps from a fort. When the sun had warmed his chilled limbs a little, he attempted to crawl away from his exposed position, and being covered with mud, he succeeded by sliding on his back, inch by inch, though soldiers were several times almost near enough to tread on him. After gaining the swamp, he wandered for several hours among the cypresses, scratched and torn at every step by thorns and briars. At last he found an aged negro, and the disposition he made of him is noteworthy. Instead of employing him to assist in his escape, Cushing plied him with greenbacks and texts of Scripture, until he induced him to go into Plymouth and get news of the last night's affair. The tidings he brought back were such a cordial to the forlorn victor that he plunged into the swamp with new heart and hope. In the afternoon he came upon a stream where there was a picket post of soldiers who had a small skiff fastened to a cypress root in the water. Watching them till they sat down to eat, he swam to the boat, noiselessly unfastened it, and drew it around a bend in the river, then got in and paddled for life and liberty. He floated on through twilight to darkness, out of the Roanoke into the broad Sound. The night was providentially still and calm. He steered by the stars till he reached the picket vessel, Valley City. He had strength enough left to give a feeble hail, then fell with a splash into the water in the bottom of his boat. He had paddled, he says, every minute for 10 successive hours, and for 4 my body had been asleep, with the exception of my 2 arms and brain. At first they took the skiff for a torpedo boat, and were more inclined to give him a volley of musketry than to pick him up, but he soon established his identity, refreshed himself, and went to report to the flagship, where he was received as one risen from the dead, with salutes of rejoicing. The night air became gay with rockets, and all hands were called to cheer ship. Perhaps the most remarkable words in the simple narrative this heroic youth has left of his strange adventure are these, with which it closes: "In the morning I was again well in every way, with the exception of hands and feet, and had the pleasure of exchanging shots with the batteries that I had inspected on the day previous." On the 30th of October, Commander Macomb having ascertained that the direct channel was obstructed, passed into the Roanoke above Plymouth by Middle River, and thus took the place in reverse. A spirited engagement between the fleet and the forts began about 11 in the morning of the 31st. A fortunate shot from the Shamrock exploded the enemy's magazine, and the Confederates hastily evacuated their works. The victorious sailors, rowing ashore, captured the rear guard with 22 cannon and a large quantity of stores. CHAPTER III.